What you call kindness may be the mask you built to be loved. Until you see it, you will keep abandoning yourself to belong.
You answered a message at 2 in the morning not because you wanted to. You answered because something inside you, something old, something trained, told you that not answering would cost you something. You don't know exactly what. Maybe love, maybe approval, maybe just the absence of that tight, quiet discomfort that follows you when someone is waiting and you are not there. You didn't choose that response. It chose you. And that distinction, as small as it sounds, is one of the most important things you will ever sit with. There is a version of you that existed before all of this. Before the obligations, before the expectations, before you learned what happened when you said no, or when you went quiet, or when you put yourself first. That version of you was not yet useful to anyone. And slowly, systematically, without anyone planning it or meaning harm by it, you were taught how to become useful, how to be present, how to be there, how to be available, not because it was good for you, but because it worked. Because when you were available, things went smoothly. People smiled, the room stayed warm, and you were safe. That is where it starts. Not in adulthood, not in your first relationship or your first job, or the first time someone made you feel guilty for taking an afternoon to yourself. It starts at an age when you had no language for any of this, when the only tools you had were sensation and observation, when the world was not yet a set of ideas to reason through, but a set of signals to read. And you read them. You read them constantly, obsessively, with the survival precision of someone whose entire world depended on getting it right. Because it did. You were small. You needed people. And people, you discovered, came with conditions. This is not cynicism. It is biology. The human child is the most dependent creature on the planet. Unlike almost every other species, a human infant cannot feed itself, cannot move itself, cannot regulate its own temperature or emotions for years. It is completely, totally dependent on the adults around it. And that dependency is not just physical, it is emotional. The child does not merely need food and shelter. It needs attunement. It needs to be seen. It needs a face to respond to its face, a voice to respond to its voice, arms that come when the crying starts. Without that responsiveness, the nervous system of a child does not develop correctly. Connection is not a luxury for the young. It is oxygen. And so you learned very early that connection had to be maintained, that you had a role in maintaining it, that your behavior had consequences for the quality of warmth around you. You watched the adults in your life. You noticed what made them turn toward you and what made them turn away. You noticed what generated that particular light in a parent's eyes, the light that felt like everything, and you learned to produce whatever caused it. You were not manipulative. You were adaptive. You were doing what every child does, what every child must do, mapping the emotional landscape of your caregivers so that you could stay close to them without triggering the cold. Some children learned that performance got them warmth, a perfect score, a funny joke, an obedient smile. Some learned that invisibility was safest. Disappear and there is no friction. Some learned that their needs made adults uncomfortable, so the needs were swallowed, buried, rerouted. And some, many more than most people acknowledge, learned that being available, being helpful, being the one who asks nothing and gives everything was the most reliable path to acceptance. These children grew up. They became adults, and the strategy that kept them safe at 6 years old became the architecture of their entire personality. The mask was built so gradually, so naturally, that it never felt like a mask. It felt like character. It felt like who you are. You are the dependable one, the caring one, the one people can call at any hour and know you will show up. You are proud of this, or you were once. There is a particular kind of pride that comes from being needed, from being the stable center of other people's chaos. It feels like strength. It looks like generosity. But underneath it, if you stay still long enough to feel it, there is something else. There is exhaustion. There is a low-grade resentment you immediately feel guilty for. There is the strange experience of not knowing what you actually want, because you have spent so long tracking what other people want that your own signal has gone quiet. The psyche does not tolerate this indefinitely. There is a part of you, and this part is not small, even if it feels inaccessible, that knows the difference between what you chose and what you were trained to perform. This part keeps records. It tracks every time you said yes when your body said no, every time you picked up the phone when what you needed was silence, every time you adjusted your mood to match someone else's comfort level, while your own discomfort quietly accumulated somewhere below your awareness. This part does not speak in words. It speaks in the tightening of your jaw when a notification arrives, in the flatness that descends after a long day of being good, in the strange, sourceless grief that visits you in quiet moments when there is nothing to do and no one to be helpful for. This is not depression, necessarily. It is closer to disorientation, because when the performing stops, when the calls slow down, when the obligations pause, when there is suddenly no one needing anything from you, you do not feel free. You feel unmoored. You feel almost afraid, because the performance is not just something you do. It has become the framework through which you understand your own value. If no one needs you, who are you? If you are not being useful, what are you worth? These questions feel too sharp to look at directly, so most people do not. They fill the silence with more availability, more helpfulness, more being there for others as a way of never having to sit with the discomfort of being there for themselves. There is something else worth naming here. The adults who raised you were not, in most cases, engineering your compliance deliberately. They were human beings with their own unexamined conditioning, their own emotional needs, their own inherited patterns from their own childhoods. The mother who needed you to be fine so that she could feel like she was doing it right. The father who went cold when you showed vulnerability, because his own father had taught him that vulnerability was dangerous. The teacher who rewarded compliance and looked past the student who sat quietly with something enormous happening inside. None of them were trying to wire you for self-abandonment. They were doing what people do, expressing their own needs through the available channels. And you, as children do, adapted to those channels. You became what the environment required. The tragedy is not that anyone meant harm. The tragedy is that no one was watching carefully enough to see what you were trading away in order to fit. The need for approval is not weakness. Let that land. It is not a character flaw or a sign that something went wrong in you specifically. It is what happens when a child's need for connection gets fused with the experience of earning connection through behavior. When love feels conditional, not necessarily because the people around you were cruel, but because love is always expressed through human beings who are themselves conditioned, themselves limited, themselves carrying their own unexamined patterns. The child learns to work for it, to be worthy of it, to perform their way into it. And the terrible efficiency of this adaptation is that it works, not perfectly, not sustainably, but well enough to become habit, well enough to become reflex, well enough to become you. This pattern is everywhere once you learn to see it. In the workplace, it is the person who cannot leave until everyone else has left, who volunteers for every additional task, not because they have time, but because saying no feels like a kind of failure, who has never sent an email that simply said no without also offering 3 alternatives and an apology. In friendships, it is the one who is always the listener, always the anchor, always the one whose problems get deferred to next time. In romantic relationships, it is the shape-shifting that happens so naturally, it does not even feel like shape-shifting. The small contractions of self, the quiet erasures of preference, the way you become a slightly different version of yourself depending on what the person in front of you seems to need you to be. Online, it is the checking, the compulsive returning to a sent message to see if it has been read, the miniature death that occurs when a response does not come as quickly as expected. The platform itself was designed around these exact vulnerabilities. The variable reward schedule, the visible like counts, the read receipts, but the vulnerability it exploits was installed long before any of that existed. The technology simply found a wound that was already there and built an entire economy around it. Consider what happens in your adult relationships when you sense someone's disapproval. Not even expressed disapproval, just the possibility of it, the slight cooling in their tone, the unreturned message. the moment when their attention drifts away from you and towards something else. What happens in your body? For most people who carry this conditioning, there is an immediate involuntary response, a contraction, a scanning, a rapid, mostly unconscious review of recent interactions, searching for what went wrong, what you said, what you did, how you can fix it. You are not thinking this through deliberately. Your nervous system is running a program that was written decades ago. A program that says, distance is danger. Disapproval means withdrawal of love. Do whatever it takes to close the gap. And so you reach out first. You soften your position. You apologize even when you are not sure what you are apologizing for. You make yourself warmer, lighter, more agreeable. You are available. Even when you are depleted, even when what you need is to be held rather than to hold, you make yourself available because the alternative, the possibility of being the reason someone pulls away, is a fear that runs deeper than reason. This is the inheritance of the child who learned that their natural state was not enough, that they had to add something, offer something, perform something in order to remain in the warmth. Here is the part most people resist. This pattern is not primarily about the people in your life right now. Your partner, your friends, your colleagues who expect things from you. The pattern is not about them. They are the screen onto which an old fear is being projected. The fear belonged originally to a much smaller version of you, in a much more vulnerable situation, with far fewer options. But the nervous system does not check timestamps. It does not update its threat assessments automatically. It responds to the shape of the situation, not the content of it, and the shape of someone needing you, or the shape of someone's potential disappointment, matches a very old template. So the old response fires, the old adaptation activates, and you answer the message at 2 in the morning. This is worth sitting with, honestly, without self-criticism. Because the moment you understand this as conditioning rather than character, something shifts. Not all at once, not comfortably, but genuinely. You begin to notice the gap, however small, between the impulse to respond and the act of responding. That gap is where something new can grow. It is where choice lives. It is, in the deepest sense, where you live, as distinct from the accumulated habits that have been living in your place. The discomfort of challenging this conditioning is real. It is not dramatic. It is quiet and persistent. When you begin to set a boundary, when you let a message sit unanswered, when you say you cannot come, when you choose your own rest over someone else's request, the response inside you is not relief. Not at first. The first response is alarm. The old circuitry fires. You have failed to maintain the connection. Someone might be disappointed. And disappointment, somewhere in the deepest layer of your nervous system, still rhymes with abandonment. So you feel it physically, in your chest, in the restlessness that makes it impossible to simply rest. But there is something underneath that alarm, something steadier. If you stay with it long enough, and this requires a tolerance for discomfort that the conditioning actively discourages, you begin to feel something else, something that does not have an easy name. It is the sensation of being present in your own life, of occupying your own skin without the constant surveillance of how you are being received, of wanting something and not immediately filtering it through whether wanting it will make you inconvenient, demanding, or too much. That sensation, unfamiliar as it is not selfishness. It is the first quiet stirring of a self that has been waiting with extraordinary patience for you to come back to it. The people who have done this work, not finished it, because it is not that kind of work, but genuinely engaged with it, often describe a strange paradox. They thought that being less available would damage their relationships, that pulling back even slightly would cause the people around them to leave, to be hurt, to lose interest. What many of them found instead was something more complicated and ultimately more honest. Some relationships did shift. Some people who had been comfortable with the dynamic were unsettled by a version of you that required reciprocity, that had preferences, that sometimes said, "Not now." And the loss of those relationships, painful as it was also clarifying. Because what remained, what stayed, what adjusted, what leaned in, was something different. Something that could hold a person who was not endlessly giving. Something that did not require performance as the cost of entry. The deeper question is not whether you can afford to stop being so available. The deeper question is what it has cost you to be this way. Not in abstract terms, but in lived terms. Think of the things you did not say because you were afraid of how they would land. The projects you did not pursue because you were too busy maintaining everyone else's equilibrium. The version of yourself you set aside, temporarily, which then became permanently, because there was always someone who needed the version that was easier to be around. What did that cost? Not what could have been. That is too speculative, too melancholy to be useful. But what is it costing right now, today? In the texture of your daily experience, the conditioning runs deep. It does not dissolve through understanding alone. Understanding is the beginning, not the end. What actually changes the pattern is the accumulation of small, specific moments in which you choose differently, not heroically, not all at once, but in the tiny, unremarkable decision not to respond immediately, in the ordinary act of finishing a thought before the phone is picked up, in the moment of noticing the impulse to make yourself smaller so someone else can feel bigger, and pausing, just pausing. Not to perform self-awareness, but because you caught a glimpse of what is happening, and for 1 second, the automatic became visible. And in that second of visibility, something ancient in you loosens its grip, just slightly, just enough. And in that loosening, you remember, not as a thought, but as something older and more reliable than thought, that you were here before you were useful to anyone. Who do not like this version of you? The version that does not answer immediately. The version that says, I need time to think about that. The version that occasionally chooses its own rest over someone else's request. Some of them will express disappointment, some will withdraw, and the old training will fire immediately, urgently, telling you that you have done something wrong, that you are being selfish, that a good person would not do this. Sit with that feeling without obeying it. Because that feeling is not wisdom, it is a recording. It is the voice of every moment in your history when disapproval was followed by something cold and frightening. It is old information, and it deserves to be heard because it came from real experience, but it does not deserve the final word on how you live. That you have a life that belongs to you, that the child who first learned to earn love was doing what they had to do, and they were brave, and they were clever, and they were doing the best they could with what they had. And now you have more. You have the capacity to see it, and seeing it, even once, even briefly, is not nothing. This is the only place it changes. You were not born available. You were made that way by a world that needed something from you before you were old enough to understand the terms. That is not a wound to carry into every room you enter. It is a pattern to recognize, to question, to sit with, and, slowly, on your own terms, to choose something different from. Not because being there for others is wrong, it is not, but because being there for yourself first is not selfishness. It is the foundation without which everything you give to others is built on sand. It is the thing that was never modeled for you, never named for you, never offered to you as a legitimate option. And it is the most honest thing you can do with the life you were given. Not to abandon those you love, but to stop abandoning the person you were before you learned you had to earn the right to be loved at all.